for coming on. Darn it, exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Talita. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Friday afternoon Falcon session, the branch of NIST. It's wonderful to have you all here. And joining us is Dr. Jenny Knight, who's been an awesome power force in the world of pedagogy and in NIST for quite a long time. I won't say how many years because you probably won't want me to. Jenny's done some really wonderful work in trying to understand a range of different pedagogy approaches. Her research has kind of gone from developing concepts for assignments and the benefits of peer discussion, of clicker questions, and investigating how students solve complex problems in genetics. But in addition to that, she's got a whole bunch of different hats that she can kind of put on to kind of lead us through many different discussion points. Today, what Jenny's going to be giving us a talk on is how students can improve their ability to reflect on their learning and change their study strategies using a range of techniques. And with that, I will leave it over to you, Jenny, to walk us through.
Thank you so much, Neil. Nice to be here. Nice to see all of you. Some old friends, I see. I would like this to be really, really informal. I mean, I do have a big old PowerPoint as if I'm giving a formal talk, but I don't feel that I need to do anything formal here. So I hope that as I go through and just share some of my thoughts with you guys, that you'll feel free to interrupt at any time. And I'll probably ask you a couple times to just sort of put stuff into the chat window if you've got things to add, and I'll try to keep an eye on it. Sorry, I'm just like closing windows here so I can see everything. All right. Yeah, so I got interested in how students think about their learning a couple of years ago. And like Neil said, I've done a lot of different kinds of things over my career. It has been 20 plus years that I've been involved with NIST. So yeah, I've been around for a while, and I'm happy to go into more detail on any of the things that might pop into your mind today as we talk about understanding metacognition. It's become clear to me as I've started learning about metacognition and also trying to understand how students think about their thinking, that this is not a very instinctive scenario. Knowing what you know and understanding what to do about that is it's just not instinctive. I think that people have to be taught to think about their thinking and learning. So sometimes when I talk about this topic, people think that I'm approaching it with a deficit mindset, that I think the students are to blame. And I just want to say at the outset that that's totally not what I'm saying, because I think all of us have this problem. So it's really just students are people, and people are not good at thinking about what they know. We're also it's really hard for us to change in general. Just, it doesn't have to be about thinking you can take yourself outside of even education, but just change is hard. And so if you are a student and you are not doing well, even if you know that the strategies you're using are not working, it is very hard for you to change. And that's been, we've got evidence of that in the literature. What's also interesting to me is that if you look at students outside of the educational context, they have a different sort of mindset than they do within the educational context. So if you ask them about learning how to play basketball or playing video games or any of their other hobbies, they talk about how important practice is and how they have to focus and how getting feedback is really important and how failure is like a critical component of getting good at something. Those are all awesome ways of thinking about learning. But students, when they think about school, they think less about that and more about grades. That's probably not that surprising because obviously they are graded. And so ultimately, many of them are thinking about the next steps in their lives and they care about their grades. So like my youngest son is graduating from high school this year. I will finally be done with schooling. Well, at least schooling when my children are at home. And he's like an amazing kid with all kinds of great things going for him. But right now, like all he's worried about is his grades, because he wants to get into, quote, a good school. And he knows they're going to be looking at his grades. So it's unfortunate, but just a fact of life. I think that our educational system puts a lot of pressure on students to get good grades, and therefore that's what they think about the most. That kind of external validation, as opposed to an internal chronometer or metric of what they are learning or what they know. So we've got, you know, our own evidence of this just from talking to students and asking students what they're thinking about. And so unsurprisingly, I just said that students think about performance the most. And if you ask them how they know that the strategies they're using are working, they usually talk about their grades. So here are a couple of examples, but you see all kinds of things, even like, I'm not doing very well because, or I'm not understanding things very well because my grades are low. So again, this reflection that everything has to do with grades. That's their most common response. They do sometimes also talk about what they know, or how they know something. So they do mention knowledge. I feel confident, I know the material, or if I get things wrong, I can go back and kind of figure out why I got things wrong. That's a good response. And then they also sometimes talk about the practice of applying their knowledge or working with other people and practicing, and that helps them, you know, kind of figure out whether they know if their strategies are working. I don't know if you all have had this experience as you've become older. I'm guessing you have. Nobody on this call is probably super young, but you really kind of change your perspective about learning as you get older. Like someone just wrote, I studied the wrong things. Like I think back to my brain as an undergraduate student, which was admittedly quite a long time ago, but nonetheless, all I remember is that I never felt like I knew what I was doing. Like I never really felt confident. I always felt like I was missing something. I wasn't great at memorizing. And at that time, that's what college was all about. I hope it's not quite as much that way anymore, but it sure was that way then. Yes, another, Erica, you put in, it was hard to see the big picture. I vividly remember, like, I teach genetics now, and I remember genetics in college being like this mass of stuff that didn't hold together at all. So I try really hard now as a teacher to try to help people see the big picture, because without the big picture, it's all just a bunch of random stuff that doesn't feel like it's worth learning. So just to kind of give like a little bit of a framework for the work that I'm doing right now, everything that I'll talk about today kind of falls under the heading of self-regulated learning, or the framework of self-regulated learning, which has been proposed to be comprised of 3 components: motivation, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with what motivation is, and sort of the lack of motivation and how that can be challenging; cognition, which is actual knowledge about a topic; and then metacognition, which I've already introduced, the knowledge of your knowledge, or the ability to regulate your knowledge. So I'm going to focus in on, like, how do we really measure students' metacognition, and does their metacognition have an impact for their learning? So I'm first going to tell you a little bit about what kinds of strategies students report using in the course that I am going to be talking about today, which is a genetics course. I'll also talk a little bit about the strategy of self-testing and how it affects students' performance. And then following up on that, I'm going to talk about how self-report of self-testing is correlated with performance. So we'll get the metacognition in there at the end. This is a look at what the course is that I'll be reporting on. I'm going to show you data that spans over 3 to 4 semesters of data collection. This is a large enrollment introductory course. in our department, we don't teach 2 semesters of intro bio. We teach 1 semester of introduction to molecular biology, and the second semester is introduction to genetics. And so, although many people think of genetics as an upper division elective or upper division requirement, in our major, it's actually a first-year required course. So you'll see, not surprisingly then, that we have a lot of freshmen and sophomores enrolled in the course, but a lot of people from other majors on our campus also take this course. So it's not exclusively molecular biology majors, and therefore it's not exclusively freshmen and sophomores. Interestingly, we have a really high enrollment of females in this course. In general, the major is about 60% female. And so you can see here that we have just, I don't know, by chance, maybe a higher enrollment of females over the semesters that I have collected data. And at CU, we are a very non-diverse institution, as you can see, which makes it a little bit challenging for us to address some of the important issues, like whether first-generation students are getting the attention they need, or whether people from underserved backgrounds are getting the help they need. We do always include these the self-report of race into our models, but we just don't have a very large population. Oh, I should say a little bit about the course. The structure of the course, and please feel free to ask questions. So the structure of the course is, it's quite interactive. I don't like the word flipped, so it's not, I don't want to use it, but it's not flipped in that there is some lecturing every day, but there's also a lot of group work and a lot of questions being asked of the students, and the students asking a lot of questions of us. I do teach one of the sections of this course, but there are 2 sections per semester, and it's taught every semester. So there are obviously other instructors as well. But we all use the exact same format, the exact same slides, all the same questions, etc. So we kind of think of these students as all enrolled in one course, even though the instructors are different. There's lots of group work, like I said, lots of in-class activities, and rather than having just a couple high stakes assessments, we have 6 quizzes and a final exam. So only about half of their points in the course come from the high stakes assessments, like the quizzes and the exams. Okay, the other thing that we have taken to doing on a regular basis is just asking our students to report their strategies on a survey that they take after their quizzes. And to decrease the chance that they are driven crazy by our surveys, we only give a survey after every other quiz. So after 3 of their 6 quizzes, we ask them to give us a couple of different pieces of information. And one of them is their learning strategies. And so we have assembled this list of strategies that you can see along the x-axis of the graph. We chose those strategies after having students write in what they were doing for a number of semesters. So we took like the common strategies students were telling us, and we used those. And then we added in a couple more metacognitive strategies that students didn't necessarily say very frequently, but that we think are useful and we wanted to encourage them to use. So students are selecting their top 4 strategies, and you can see the percent of students who are choosing these different strategies. So in blue are cognitive types of strategies, very active cognitive. So this is self-testing, group studying, summarizing notes, coming up with new questions to test themselves. In orange are cognitive strategies. So they're knowledge-based strategies, but they're very passive. And that's like rereading notes, rewatching videos, and rereading like course materials. And then lastly are the metacognitive strategies that we had to kind of suggest to the students: planning when to study, how to study, evaluating their understanding, and prioritizing difficult concepts. So not surprisingly, given what I told you before, not a lot of students select the green metacognitive strategies, but people do select them. It's just not, never goes above 20 to 30% of the time. And the two winners here in terms of strategies commonly reported are rereading their notes, which is a passive strategy and actually unlikely to be very helpful in this course because it's all about problem solving. And then self-testing, which actually we're very happy that this many students report self-testing because we constantly tell them that practicing solving problems is the way to learn the material, and we give them an opportunity to self-test. So we're glad to see that they're actually doing that. Oops, sorry. So we also were curious about if a student does not perform well on a quiz, how often will they actually report that they would like to change their strategies? So you would think that everybody who doesn't do well will report that they plan to use a new strategy. But we were, thinking, okay, people don't like to change. And so let's just see what our student population looks like. And so for each quiz that we collected data on, we just took the grade on the quiz, and then we aligned that with what the students said about what they plan to do next. So we've broken their plans down by the category of the grade they got on the quiz. And I thought this was pretty interesting. So, and you guys can tell me what you think. I'd be happy to see what you think in the chat if you're interested. There's a spread of the way people respond to this. Does this surprise anybody? Does this seem just about like what you'd expect? What do you guys think when you look at this graph? I'll give you a minute to process what's being shown and then tell me what you think when you're ready. Just type it in the chat. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. There's obviously a difference amongst the different categories of grades. But nothing goes over 50%. So I think that's, kind of interesting that even in the category of the failing students, the most common response is study more frequently. The next common one is use a different strategy. And I really like what Karen just wrote in the chat, which is it'd be interesting to know how the students felt about the grade they got. Like, was this the grade they expected? So like a B student who got a B might be like, that's cool. I'm good with that B. Like, I don't want to change anything. And even a C student could be in that same category. Like, I'm in this class to pass it. I feel good about getting a C. So we have asked that question before. We did not ask it for this set of data. So I can't tell you whether they were meeting their expectations for this particular data set. But I do.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, of course, please chime in.
Sorry, I can't find my chat.
No worries.
The two responses, put in more time and study more frequently, are they, have you talked to them about the distinction about spacing out their studying or is, because I can imagine some students looking at that and thinking it means the same thing.
Oh, yeah, they might think it means the same thing. Some people are very aware of the cramming. They've heard about spacing rather than cramming. I don't. So this whole set of information is basically gathered as like a baseline. Like, what are my students doing right now and what are they thinking right now? I'll tell you about the interventions we have planned later, but I have not told them about not cramming or anything like that. So, but some of them already know about that from high school. So some of them may really be able to distinguish between putting in more time, like just more hours versus spacing. But I don't know. Yeah, you're right that they could maybe conflate the two. Okay, so we cluster the DNF students because on any given quiz, a student might bomb. and so we put the DNF students together just because we think that category of students probably thinks pretty similarly about their future prospects in the course. We actually don't give out very many failing grades in this course because there are so many other assignments that even if they're doing relatively poorly on their quizzes, they can still pull their grade up with many other components of the course. And so I don't like to isolate the F students because there ultimately are very few failing students. It's like less than, hang on a second, let me just think for a second. It's less than 10% usually. Okay, so we took this data that you see, and then we asked each of the students, we asked all the students, if you have selected that you plan to use a different strategy, what strategy do you plan to use? And then they could choose again from the same set of strategies that they initially reported on, they could re-choose a strategy. So just to make sure that you guys remember what those look like, they had cognitive strategies, the active strategies, the passive strategies, and the metacognitive strategies. And so we just grouped their responses by those rather than showing every single different kind of strategy they chose. And I thought this was super interesting that no matter what the grade the student had gotten, if they say they're going to study using a different strategy, the distribution of the responses is identical across the grades. So a lot of people are going to try cognitive strategies, and about 40% of the students are going to try some kind of metacognitive strategy. So that was interesting to us that they are choosing, they're saying they're interested in choosing those metacognitive strategies. Karen, you have a question.
Yes, I was just wondering what self-testing meant from the student's perspective. Are you giving them problem sets, or are you just expecting them to make, or no, are they making flashcards and testing themselves?
Yeah.
Unless I give them some structure, my students don't know how to test themselves.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yes. I should probably have identified what I meant by self-testing at the very beginning. But we have a very specific definition for self-testing, which I will share with you in 1 second. And there actually probably are different kinds of self-testing that we're not capturing with this particular category. I've given an abbreviation here. When they choose self-testing, they're actually choosing a very specific kind of self-testing, which I'll show you in 1 second. But you're right that in general, students might not know what self-testing is unless you've actually shown them something. So thank you for, you're like a plant. You gave me the cue to the next slides. So I want to focus on self-testing. It's one of the few things that we can actually both ask students about and then also measure. So many things that students say they're doing, we actually have no idea if they're doing them. So for example, I don't know if students are rereading their notes or studying with friends. I don't know what they're really doing. They're saying they're doing those things, but it's hard for me to know if they're doing them or not. For self-testing, I actually do know if they're doing it. And so let me define self-testing and show you why I know if they're doing it. So in my class, we use a really cool system called Codon Learning. This is a new product that I see that Ashley Rowland is here. And so if you have questions about Codon, you can definitely ask her, or you can ask me. Codon is a system that students, that instructors adopt, and then their students can use. And in the study path of this system, you can deliver homework questions to students. You can also deliver pre-class, like questions before they come to class, which I also use. And in this system, super cool because it's transparent to the student what the learning objective is for the question that they're about to do. So every question they have is aligned to a learning objective. And after they submit their homework questions, which are required, they can then also do additional practice questions. And those fall into 2 different categories: prep questions, which are, again, organized by the learning objective and by the topic. And then they can also do a practice test, which puts a new set of prep questions essentially together so that they can do across multiple topics at a time. So we tell students, this is your self-testing opportunity. You can go in and do prep questions anytime you want. You have to submit the homework questions, but you can do prep questions and take the practice test before your quiz. So this is a 2-week cycle. So in every 2-week cycle leading up to a quiz, we can look at the number of prep questions and the number of practice test questions that an individual has completed. So then we get a percent completion of the practice tests, of the self-testing. And we mush it all together. That if we separate it, it gives us a similar result. So we just have chosen to define this as self-testing. And when we ask students, are you self-testing? We actually have self-testing by doing prep questions or practice test questions. So that additional piece of text is there when they're selecting that. So they know what we mean by self-testing. Code on Learning is a separate application. It's a separate piece of software. It's sort of like, imagine that you might assign like mastering genetics to your students or mastering biology. And so it's not really a textbook, but it is a platform in which students can read information and answer questions, get feedback on their performance, and practice. And we basically sell it to the students at a much cheaper price than a textbook. And this is their way of completing their work. So, sorry, let me just go back for 1 second and make sure everyone's with me. So we measure the amount of self-testing that students engage in, and then we compare the amount of self-testing they've engaged in to how they do in the course. And so if you just focus on the graph for a moment, and then I'll talk about the regression analysis in a sec. On the graph, I've broken things down by sort of little quartiles of self-testing completion, and shown you the percent in the course that the students achieve when they complete this amount of self-testing. And this is just because the picture is a lot nicer than the regression analysis details. So you can see from the picture that there's a very obvious trend towards better performance in the course when there's more self-testing being achieved. When we do a regression analysis, what we find is that, so with the regression analysis, we can control for a bunch of different things, including their incoming knowledge, which we assess with the genetics concept assessment in the first week of class. We can also control for gender identity. This is all self-described, race, ethnicity, year in school, etc. And so in controlling for all of that, what we can say is that compared to individuals who answer none of the additional questions, those who answered all of them are predicted to score 12% higher in the course. So that's a relatively strong effect of practicing the questions. The other really strong predictor of performance, not surprisingly, is their incoming knowledge. But the regression analysis, of course, controls for that. So a student who comes in with a low score on the GCA, 2 students who come in with low scores on a GCA, one who practices and one who doesn't, the one who practices is predicted to do a lot better in the course. And the same would be true for a higher performing student. So the practicing is good, even if you're coming in low, medium, or high in terms of your prior knowledge. This is not super surprising, right? Practicing should help students. It's been the kind of thing we've been encouraging students to do for eons. So this just basically confirms that, in fact, in this environment with this kind of a course, practicing using this platform is really helpful to the students. So I mentioned before that because we have this capacity to look at the percent completion, we can connect that amount of completion of practice of self-testing with the accuracy of the student reporting. So now we're getting back into sort of the metacognitive component of the student. If the students are aware of what they're doing, then theoretically, they should be able to accurately report what they're doing as they study for this class. And so we are asking them to report their strategies, and then we're able to go in and look at whether or not they're doing the self-testing they say they're doing. So I like to think of accuracy as essentially a measure of metacognitive awareness. It's not foolproof, but it is one way of thinking about that awareness level, is the accuracy of their reporting. We've also used accuracy of reporting to look at the prediction of their grades. So their ability to, like, if you ask them right after they complete a quiz, do you think you got an A, B, C, D, or F? And they report, they can either over predict their grade or under predict their grade. That is also a measure of metacognitive awareness, that accuracy. And I've done other work on that, but I wasn't going to talk about that today unless people have questions. Okay, so along those lines, let's talk a little bit about what happens when we look at the accuracy of the self-testing reports. So here we've taken individuals who have actually taken our post-quiz survey all 3 times, so that we have 3 data points from them. And we ask them again to report what they did study strategy-wise. And then if they reported self-testing and actually did the self-testing in the Codon platform, then that's a match. And if they didn't do it, then it's not a match. And so they can either match 0 times. In other words, they say they're self-testing, but they actually not self-testing. They can match 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. And so you can see from this graph that the students who are reporting self-testing and actually self-testing 3 times are performing significantly better than the individuals in all of the other categories. So this performance here is about 88%, 89%, something like that. The mean, the X is the mean, 88%, I think it was, is significantly higher than the performance in those other categories. So this is, I find this really fascinating. So something as sort of nebulous, really, of reporting accurately what you're doing could be a way for us to understand a student's connection to their own learning behaviors. If I'm connected and I know what I'm doing and I'm reflective about what I'm doing, then I'm going to be able to report that behavior accurately. If I'm self-testing and I'm reporting self-testing, then, so we know that self-testing is going to improve the student's grades on average. So in addition to that, if I'm actually accurate in my reporting, I have also a better chance of performing well in the course. So this makes me just think more about the critical nature of the self-reflection of the students. And that's kind of what I think about at night, is how can I really get these students to be better at this this awareness? How can I get them to become more accurate, more in tune with what they're doing? Because if I can get them to be more in tune, it sure looks like that's going to have an impact on their grade. So I've got 2 ideas at the moment, but I would love to hear other people's ideas, because I think there are a lot of ways that we can engage students. The key with engaging them is most likely that we need to try to engage everybody, because one of the things I haven't shown you here, but that we know from our own work and from prior work, is that students who are doing well in a course are also generally better at their metacognitive processes. So that may be, they may be doing better because they're more metacognitive, or they may just be better prepared, and therefore they're doing well in the course, and it's easy for them to think about their strategies because they're being successful. So it's not a difficult thing for them to do. So we don't, we can't say that metacognitive awareness is directly allowing students to perform better. It's just a correlation. But nonetheless, what we see is that a lot of students who are not good at these strategies are also doing poorly in the course. So we really want to be able to help the students who cannot do these things well. And so we need some kind of way of really getting everyone to do it. And this is the hard part, because, the students who are like overachievers they'll do everything and they just get better and better. And the students who are not overachievers or are for some reason struggling, whatever it may be, are less inclined to do the things that we give them. So there's a couple things I want to try. Here's one of the things that we're planning on trying. We have not enacted this yet, but our Center for Teaching and Learning designed a series of modules in Canvas that are about metacognition. And they can be embedded into any Canvas platform. I mean, any course that uses Canvas. We use Canvas for the genetics course in addition to using the Codon software. And so within Canvas, we're thinking that we could maybe assign these modules to students and give them points for completing the modules. And they could go in and do these things at different times in the semester. So one of the things that's included in the module is an exam strategy reflection, which is kind of similar to the one that I've already done with my students. But in addition to reflecting on what they did and what worked and didn't work, it also gives them some tips and tools, and you can click on different pages that give you different kinds of information. So it's a little bit more feedback than we're currently giving students. There's also a little module on time management and thinking about focusing and the drawbacks of procrastinating. Then there's a whole unit about spacing and self-testing. So students would then be explicitly made aware of those strategies that we know are so effective. And there's also a little bit about anxiety and mindfulness, which I really, was excited to see in there, because I think that's so important for the students to, they can't forget about that component of their learning. Their mental health is critical as well. So that's one idea that we, like I said, we haven't tried it yet, but we're looking forward to seeing how that rolls out. And then another thing that we're trying right now is something called a learning strategy profile. And this is based on Gregory Shaw's work. He called this a strategy evaluation matrix, and my grad student got excited about trying this out with students. And so we currently have in our genetics class an assignment at 3 different times. They are asked to fill out this profile and then submit it, not for a grade, but for points for completing it. And then we ask them to keep thinking about it while they're going through the course. And we tell them, we're going to ask you to revise this, and then we're going to ask you to resubmit it. And you can change the order of your strategies, put something different in there, or take something out if you no longer think it's useful. And we ask them to do that 3 times, and then we're going to collect all that data and see what happens, see how they are changing over time. So the reason that this is projected to be helpful is that, first of all, it explicitly is introducing the idea to students that they need to think about their strategy and why they're using it, when they might be able to use it the best, and how they should use it. And they can give examples if they want to. And then, so all of those are very metacognitive processes, thinking about why, when, and how. And then in addition, we're asking them to revise it. And so evaluating and revising is, if you can learn how to do that, then you're much more likely to adopt a new strategy. So we're trying to give them these tools, and we're giving them credit for doing them, which we hope is going to stimulate students at different levels of performance to engage in the in this activity. So far, we've seen just about everything you can imagine. We've seen students who have 5 different learning strategies, and they fill out every single box in this profile, which is maybe overkill, especially at the very beginning of the semester. And then we've seen students who don't write very much. We've seen students who are really quite clear about why they're using a strategy. And we've seen students who kind of just they put something in the box, but it's not very reflective. So we've definitely got a broad span of responses so far, but we're early in the semester and we don't know whether students are going to change their strategies, if they're going to adapt this or use this profile in a productive way. But it's one of the things that we're trying to see if we can improve their relationship with metacognition. I have lots of time to address questions, so I hope that you'll pick my brain about lots of things and throw out ideas. But I just wanted to say thanks to the people who are doing this work with me. And then we can go back and look at other slides, or we can talk about other things. So involved in this work have been Citlali Jimenez, who is a postdoc in my group. She also worked with Code on Learning, and she's now working for Purdue University Global. So she has gone on to a job. And then I've got a current postdoc, Charlene Flowers, and then 2 grad students, Zach Hazlett and Josh Vandal. And Zach is the one who's been doing most of the work on the information that I presented today. I'll start by just addressing some of the stuff that's in the chat right now. And then if people have more questions, we can go for those. Let's see. Oops, just changed. Karen asked, do you do anything to teach students that persistence through failure is the way that learning happens? Yes. Well, again, not explicitly. So many of us who teach the course are pretty invested in the success of our students. And so we do things like after the first quiz, we show them the distribution, and then we say, if you're down here, if you did not do well and you're frustrated, don't panic. Failure is a good way of learning. It's okay to fail. We can work with you. We can help you get better. So we do a lot of messaging in class about how it's okay to be wrong and how you can fail a couple times and learn from that failure and still learn the material and do well in the course. So we do talk about that. Not all of us talk about it to the same degree. So I tend to be somebody who brings up fixed versus growth mindset. I tend to talk a lot about failure casually with the students, in the classroom, but they're not getting it from every single instructor to the same degree, even though everything else about the course is the same. So that's something that we could also incorporate into those metacognition modules, would be an explicit discussion of failure and how having that mindset that you can survive a failure is beneficial. And then a different Karen, there's a lot of Karens on the call today. A different Karen asks, what's the format of the self-tests? Are the tests graded or instructors grading? Yeah, so the format, great question. The format is a mixed format. It's multiple choice questions and short answer. And so the multiple choice questions are obviously automatically graded. And the TAs do the grading for the short answer questions. And then the practice questions or self-testing opportunities are the same. They're also like a mixture of multiple choice, matching, et cetera, whatever format we can imagine that can be automatically graded. And then we give them some practice open response questions. Those they will get. They won't be graded on any of this stuff, right? But it'll indicate if their multiple choice answers are correct or incorrect. For the short answer, we give them an answer to compare their own answer to, so that they can sort of see for themselves if they've gotten the right answer with the short response, open response questions. So we think the practice opportunities are pretty, they're designed to prepare the students for the quizzes. We think that the format and the level of the questions that's all aligned, because we've written all these questions all together at the same time, and then we just separate some out as the practice questions. Jane says, I once started a course with a question for groups to consider and then told them I wanted a bunch of wrong answers. Yeah, they don't like to be wrong. I feel like it's the sort of thing that you have to hit a lot in order for people to start to become comfortable with it. Yeah, and like I said, I like to tell them I want to hear your incorrect ideas, that your incorrect ideas are more important than your correct ideas. Like, I know the correct answers. I want to hear why you are having trouble getting to the correct answer. So I'd much rather hear about your incorrect answers. I think that messaging is really important. Karen Meyer, my friend Karen.
You're number 3. So I was working in kind of the domain of motivation instead of the metacognition. And I was looking up some belonging interventions and ran into Binning's, I think it's Kevin, he's from University of Pittsburgh. And he was breaking it down further than I had seen before into who it's helping. And so the idea was he would do a pre-test to see who had low value for an assignment versus low belonging in the class. And I guess where you would end up going is you would give the increasing value activity to the students who had low value, and you would work on belonging, because the data where we were seeing a lot of zero effect is for the part of the population that didn't need that particular intervention. So and our other problem, and that's kind of hard, but then our other problem is probably most of the people on the call have too many interventions and not enough time at this point.
Right.
And so, what if with your system, you could figure out the right questions to ask to not give everyone 5 interventions, but each person gets 1 or 2 and they get the right one.
Yes, I love that idea. I'm actually really motivated to find out more about how that can be done. And I know there's a really cool platform called eCoach that was developed at University of Michigan. And it feels to me like that system has the capacity to send people in different directions depending on their performance, or maybe it could be depending on something else. But you basically set parameters for, like, here's a message to send to certain people, and here are the links I want to be sent to these people and the ideas that they need to engage in. And that goes to these people, and this different set of stuff goes to those people, and so on. Because I completely agree with you that having people engage in something that they don't value or they don't need is like a really good way to frustrate your students, right? And why not target this a little bit better to students getting what they need? So it's just another thing to adopt. That's the problem with another platform, is that I haven't yet figured out exactly how that can be integrated into the platforms that I already use. So I haven't tried it yet, but I feel like that kind of gets at your suggestion that you target people with the kinds of things that they really need.
And it's just a huge field of research questions.
Yeah.
Because, what it is, and it's going to matter. Like, my ideal years ago, I was telling you, this is what I want. I wanted to look at my Canvas grade book. And if I ever did the same thing twice in a row, I would have data from the prior time saying, okay, this one thing that's happening, or this pattern, indicates that this subset of students would benefit from this thing right now.
Yes. Yes.
It's impossible, but we could get closer. I don't know. That would be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea. Other folks have other questions they'd like to ask, or different things they'd like to look at? Hi, Lisa. I'd love to hear from you. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jenny. Nice to see you, and thank you for sharing your research.
Of course.
I'd like to hear about your other instructors, your team of instructors that are working with you on this genetics class. You mentioned a little while ago that you're done, you maybe put a little bit more time into talking about failure and those kinds of things. But to what extent do you feel like your other colleagues have bought into this particular set of interventions, and how similar do you think that is for the student experience?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really important question, because we've probably all worked with other people who they have said that they're going to do what you want, and then they really aren't doing it, and it's a disaster, right? So I am fortunate that 2 of the other instructors on the team are really excited about this, very much. That the 3 of us, I would say, are using a lot of the same language. enthusiastic about getting the students to be successful. We're kind of maybe about the same mindset. One of those instructors is not very, she happens to be the chair of our department, and she's new to teaching this course and is new to this kind of stuff, but she's super excited about it. So she's been, in her words, she's been copying me so that she can teach it in a way that, you know, she's just like, I'm not familiar with this, but if I copy you, then I feel like I can do it right. I'm like, that's great. If that works for you, then copy me all you want and you'll figure out your own style eventually. The fourth person on the team is one of those people who follows directions really well, but doesn't really maybe have their heart in it. So I would say the fourth instructor is not, it is a good instructor in their own right, but is not quite the same in their mindset. And so that they still, the students in that person's section will still get some of this messaging because the sections are all tied together under one Canvas heading. And so they get a lot of the messages from me or other instructors, you know, so there is sort of a commonality there because there's one Canvas site for everybody that's in the course. But I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect there with that fourth instructor. I frankly feel extremely lucky that 3 out of 4 are on the same page. And, you know, that could change over time because people come in and out of these courses. I've been teaching, I said I wanted to stay in this course for a while and teach it for a significant period of time because I wanted to make a lot of changes to it. And I thought it needed a person there to do that. But over the next 10 years, hopefully I'll retire, but also other people will come in and teach the class. And I can only hope that some of these strategies will be embedded explicitly enough into the course that others will be able to do it. That's like, I think probably all of our greatest fears, right? We work so hard on something and then we're like, as soon as it leaves my hands, someone, you know, it's not going to be working anymore. So I know like that desire to hope that you've written enough stuff down and done enough with your organizational strategies that someone else can pick it up. I hope for that.
Thank you.
Of course. I'm just looking a little bit through the chat to see if I missed anything. It looks like Rana asked, can you provide more information about the quality of the self-testing? Are they getting questions right and stopping, or do they keep doing problems, whether they get it correct or not? That's a great question, Rana. We do have that data. So the way the platform is designed, if they answer a question incorrectly, they can find out that they answered it incorrectly. They get some feedback because most of these questions are, you know, multiple choice or forced response of some sort. So they'll get some feedback on their wrong answer. And then they're absolutely, because it's practice, they're absolutely allowed to go and do it again. And most students will keep doing the question until they get it right. Very few will not do that. So, you know, how much they're really engaging in their thinking is another question. Like that's, again, hard for us to measure. So if they get something wrong and they try again and get it right, I guess it's possible they could have just guessed the second time without really paying attention to the feedback. Again, they're not getting points for doing these questions. Like they're completely optional. And so our hope is that if they keep answering a question they're getting wrong, they are actually paying attention to the feedback and learning how to do it correctly. These questions are, a lot of them are like, solve this pedigree, calculate this probability, do a chi-square test. So, you know, they're not like simple questions. They're, you know, level 3, 4 on Bloom's. There are very few questions that are just like pick the right answer kind of thing. They usually involve a calculation or a thought process that's more involved. Yeah, so I think most people are like really using them to try to understand the content. At least that's my interpretation. Let's see, I've got something from, oh, hi, Gabrielle. I'm in the applied math department at CU. Our grad chair is trying to figure out why we had a mass exodus of over half our URM in the doctoral program. Wow. didn't know how to teach myself, and I saw so many others teaching themselves, and I knew I couldn't do that for 5 years. Wow. Yeah, I mean, if everybody's seeing Gabriella's message in the chat, this is really important question. What is the right answer?
It's kind of a bigger question. I know you're giving lots of really good strategies here, and I'm just wondering, what is step one?
Yeah, such an important question. So I think, teaching yourself, being able to teach yourself is a really good skill to have, but not everybody has it. Not everybody has developed it. And I guess I would think if I were seeing that people were really struggling with that, I would want to help teach them how to teach themselves. That would be the first thing that I would want to try. And I don't know that I know exactly how you do that in the applied math department. But I'm just thinking, so much of our teaching is focused on content, and we forget that, and this is kind of what my work is on, is like, we need to teach them how to be learners. We need to teach them how to process information, how to think about things, why this works and that doesn't work in terms of learning something. We need to teach them how to become experts at this particular way of thinking. And, it's a very narrow path, right? If you're doing genetics or applied math, you're learning about a certain way of thinking and a certain way of doing. And if the student, no matter what their level, if they don't know how to think that way or do that way, we have to teach them. So there's a gap there. People are coming into that program without the right tools to be successful. And if they're expected to be able to teach themselves, that's, I think, a reasonable expectation, but then they need to actually know how to do it. So that would be my step one.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
if other people have ideas, please feel free to chime in. Karen, Karen Konzelman.
Have you had your students looked at, I can't remember her names, Stephanie something or another. She has books on teaching yourself how to learn.
Yes.
And I see it on the Code On page. She's giving a whatever testimonial there. I mean, I just have found that book. I mean, that is the way I studied. She's like out of my brain, and I feel like that's the best way, that is very informative, but I don't know how to best put that information in students' hands or get them to take action.
Right. No, I've never, are you talking about Sandra McGuire's book?
Yes.
I've
never read it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is fantastic. I haven't necessarily recommended that they read that book, although why not? Like, why not recommend it? I do worry that students don't do a lot of free reading. They don't do a lot of reading that's not required for their courses, I think, especially first year students, because they're quite overwhelmed usually. But I think maybe, my idea of trying to get students to interact with these metacognition modules is along the same lines, that if we can give them some information about how to teach themselves and how to think about their learning, if we can really engage them in that process, maybe through some fun little modules online, that might land more easily than reading a book. Not that I don't think they should read. I would love it if they would all read that book. I just feel like they won't. But if I give them, maybe a little bit of encouragement, maybe a few extra credit points or something like that for completing modules where they're engaging in that kind of learning, then they might do so, and that might help them in the long run. So yeah, I agree with you completely that they need to learn how to do these things. And I think it's on us to help them learn it. I mean, they don't know it's important, and they might not know how critical it is until we tell them, hey, you might be failing this class because you don't know how to do this process of reflection and evaluation that will help you learn better.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
if no one ever teaches them
in their first year,
definitely.
I mean, in the first semester, that's pretty much when we're kind of figuring out who are the ones who are kind of able to go forth and do their own learning and teach themselves, and who are not going to have any difficulties. But by their second semester, we can really look at their grades and see, oh my goodness, okay, we need to sick these faculty advisors on this set of students, and when they meet with them, I guess I'm wondering what kind of strategies they should start with. And yeah, I see that, yeah, teaching yourself how to learn, that's a good book, but I think you're right. They might not be able to read that in addition to all the stuff that they're learning, but maybe modules,
Yeah.
maybe identifying those students by the second semester and then giving them a set of modules to work with, to think about, you know, what are their strategies and what could they possibly use going forward? Because it's always that first or second year where kind of the division happens, where you can see really, are they going to be able to finish this whole 5-year program, or are we going to have trouble here?
Yeah, I agree with you. It happens, and it's true for undergraduates as well. As soon as they encounter like a really challenging scenario, for some students, it's their freshman year. For some students, it's the sophomore year when they get to a course that's maybe more taught at a higher cognitive level. But it's that moment of, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like I've been fine up until now, and all of a sudden I can't do this. That feeling of failure and desperation is what usually leads people to leave. And the ones who stay are the ones who are like, oh yeah, I can figure out how to do this. Like I do have the capacity to learn this additional way of learning, or this additional way of looking at information, or whatever it might be. So I think it's just so critical that we give right at the point where students are struggling the most. That's when they need the help. Otherwise they'll leave. I have forgotten timing wise, whether I should be wrapping up or whether people want to stay and chat more. I'm available to stay if if anybody wants to stay.
Stop the recording and then people can free chat for a little bit more.
Okay.
Gabrielle.